Hello everybody, welcome to a very special MHTV. We're really delighted to have you with us tonight. We've got some fantastic guests, as you can see, and no doubt you'll have questions and you'll want to join in. So before we get started, can I just go to my colleague Vanessa to tell you how you can join in tonight? Vanessa?
Hi everyone, welcome. Tonight we've got a slightly different session, as Nicky says. So we're live in the room and also I'm online. We'd love you to join in. You can join in the usual way, either through Facebook on the Unite MHNA Facebook page. So if you go along to that and just look up MHTV, you should see the tweets pop up there. We'd love you to ask questions and comments as usual. We like our conversations to be interactive. If you prefer to go on to Twitter, then yeah, follow the MHTV hashtag. So either Facebook or Twitter, and I will be monitoring any comments and questions. Thanks.
Yeah.
Back to Nicky.
Thank you. We also hope to have some of our audience who's already been collecting some answers from and questions, sorry, from our fantastic answers.
Oh, they can give us the answers as well.
But some questions from our fantastic members who are really keen to join in and have conversations. So before we get started, let's introduce our guests. Would you like to go first and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. I think those of you that tune in regularly might have seen me before. So my name's Emma Wadey. I'm the Deputy Director of Mental Health Nursing and I work at NHS England for the national team. Still work clinically as well, so I'm also a consultant nurse and site liaison.
Hi, my name is Andrea Sutcliffe. I am the Chief Executive and Registrar of the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and I've also done this before, so I am looking forward to a lovely evening again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be really useful perhaps as well just to get a bit of context to find out how you came into your roles, because we watched by a lot of different people, and I think it's fantastic to see the range of different jobs that people can have. So can you tell us a little bit about how your journeys were, how you got to the jobs you're in now?
Wow. So this is my 28th year in nursing. So I started in social care in what was then called an elderly and mentally infirm home. So I was a nursing assistant. Thought I wanted to be a general nurse after that, actually. Thought that was my calling. But my first placement, I did Project 2000. And what was lucky about, I think was really good about the Project 2000 is you did get to do or taste all of the different fields of practice and settings. And you also had the opportunity to swap. So I was really, really fortunate because my first placement was mental health, and make of it what you will, but I felt at home. Yeah. And I had the opportunity to swap at the 18th month, sort of midway point, I suppose. So swapped to be a mental health nurse during my training. Since then, I qualified as a community mental health nurse. So it always surprises me when I still see on X people saying, can I go straight into the community? I went straight into the community, and that's a very long time ago. Since then, I have worked across the majority of mental health settings, actually, from community to inpatient, high secure, prison, right back round looking after older people's mental health. And as I mentioned, I'm now working in site liaison clinically. So I've had quite a potted history over the last few years. I haven't had a bit of not a normal pathway, I would say, quite a portfolio career. So I've been really lucky and have taken the opportunities when they've arisen. Been Deputy Director of Nursing a couple of times and a Chief Nurse in an ambulance trust as well. So I think all of those experiences have given me breadth and depth, so that now I'm the professional lead for mental health nursing. I can say that I've worked in most settings, still clinically work. Yeah, and I've got that breadth. And I suppose the other thing that we were just talking about, so I hope you're going to announce your news a bit later, just to put you on the spot now, Nicky, is also I did want to pursue, not necessarily a PhD in the early days, but being a typical mental health nurse, I'm nosy. really like to continue my learning. I'm curious, always want to look at how I can improve myself, but ultimately improve care for others. So I did undertake my PhD and finally qualified after quite a long time doing it part-time a couple of years ago now. So still also really active around research and importantly supporting mental health nurses into research. So I've had a bit of a clinical academic stroke operational stroke corporate background to get here, Nicky, I would say. Bit of a mix.
Yeah, interesting then. And what about you?
So I should declare straight away, I'm not a nurse, but my career, I have been even longer than you, 38 years in health and social care, working in a variety of different settings. So in locally managing services, both in social care and in health service. So I also managed mental health care of older people. We were being progressive in Camden and Islington in terms of what we were calling ourselves there. But I moved in about 2000 into national roles. So working initially for what was then the National Institute for Clinical Excellence. And I was actually the Director of Resources and Planning. And it was very small. There were only 20 people at NICE when I joined, so it was kind of right at the beginning, and we all did everything really. And one of the things that executive directors did was kind of link up with individual pieces of guidance and support the work of the collaborating centres. So I was, particularly pleased to be working with Steve Pilling and Tim Kendall in the development of the Mental Health Collaborating Centre and all of the guidelines that came out of that. And then I've sort of ranged around various different national organisations since. Went to the Social Care Institute of Excellence in 2012, which was just fantastic, sort of kind of combining what I'd done at NICE, what I'd done at a local level, and leading that organisation. That was my second chief exec's job. And then one of these things happens in life that you just don't expect is going to happen. And I remember when Robert Francis said in his report into Mid Staffordshire, we should have a chief inspector of hospitals. And I wrote a blog that said, well, if we're going to have a chief inspector of hospitals, we should have one for social care as well. Little did I know that I was writing my job description for my next job. Anyway, that job came up and I went for it. I honestly did not expect to get it and was really, really chuffed when I did. Spent 5 years at the Care Quality Commission as the Chief Inspector for Adult Social Care. Tough old job, but we made a difference, made lots of changes. And then the opportunity came up to go to the Nursing and Midwifery Council. And one of the things that I say about this job is I feel that everything in my career ends up here. So I've been a chief executive before. I know how to run an organisation. So obviously I need to be able to do that. I've worked in setting guidance and guidelines, so all of the standard setting that we have to do. Obviously, I've worked in regulation in terms of the CQC, so fitness to practice work links across there. I'm passionate about different aspects of what nurses and midwives and nursing associates do, and particularly mental health for various different reasons. And it just felt like I was coming home.
And you're both in these kind of really sort of high visibility roles, these key national roles. I wondered what attracted you to take that, because it's not for everybody, and it's really tough, and things are so tough at the moment generally in health and social care generally, and particularly nursing is struggling at times. What led you to make that choice to say, right now, this is for me, this is the job now?
Wow, if you're coming to me, I probably underestimated some of that visibility, and the reason I say that was because when I came into post in 2020, within 6 weeks, COVID-19 pandemic, and I was then redeployed to be the clinical lead for the COVID response cell for mental health, learning disabilities and autism. And of course, I wasn't anticipating that level of visibility or accountability or decision making, which when I reflect back now, even now, I think, God, that's scary. How on earth did I do that so new into role? Bit for me wasn't so much thinking about the profile of the job as more the opportunity to influence, to be around that table. So there wasn't a mental health nursing role before. A bit like you were saying, I kept saying, what about mental health nursing at every opportunity? Never expected it to be me that then got the job. But for me, it just felt like all of all of those opportunities, all of those years working across settings, all that experience has led me to this one place to be able to advocate on behalf of our profession and the people that we look after. So it was more that drew me. The visibility and the accountability and what that might mean, I think, was probably a second reckoning. I'm probably still adjusting to in some ways.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, it's more the opportunity to influence that drew me first.
I mean, you're absolutely spot on, Emma. It's a national role, a regulatory national role, your ability to influence and to make a difference on a much broader canvas is significant. So the Nursing Midwifery Council, we're a 4-nation regulator, so it's across England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. There are 808,488 people on our register at the moment, which is about 1% of the population, which is phenomenal when you kind of think about it in that way. Yeah. You know, when I go to the football and I kind of think, wow, there's thousands of people here, there's hundreds of nurses and midwives and nursing associates here as well. So, you know, that ability to be able to have that impact, I think is, you know, what draws you to it. And then for me, particularly coming into this role, because I'm not a nurse or a midwife, I wanted to make sure that I was connecting with people. So my first few months, I was out and about and, you know, going to all 4 corners of the UK, talking to people, different settings as well, trying to make sure that, you know, people could see that the NMC has got a human face, you know, and we are here to listen, want to learn, want to connect, because it's so important to be able to do that. So I was really lucky. I had a year and a bit before COVID struck, and I was very glad of that in terms of being able to do that. So in terms of raising visibility, that was a conscious thing to do, and to kind of go out there and make sure that that I was connecting. And then, of course, having to do that in a very different way when the pandemic struck. So using little videos and, you know, social media in different ways, and, you know, doing mental health TV and podcasts with other people and those sorts of things. Really important to make those connections, or else I think your regulator kind of feels distant, and I don't think that that's an appropriate way for us to do our job.
Yeah, well, I'm very conscious of the fact that we're very lucky to have you both, and we're very we've got a population, I think, we're very keen to talk to you. So I think perhaps we should come to questions. Vanessa, I'll come to you in a second, because I know we've got some people in the audience who are channeling questions as well. Perhaps would you like us to take like groups of 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll move through?
Then we can pick the ones that we'd like to answer.
Well, you can try, yes. All right, go on then, Gang. What would you like to ask?
I think just try and run a few together, really just try to paraphrase. There are questions about the parity of mental health nursing across the different branches of nursing. So kind of really, how do you safeguard the voice of mental health nurses compared to other branches?
Is that for me? I thought it might be for me.
I felt like it was coming your way.
Yeah, I felt like it did. I always find that a really interesting question around people's perception of particularly mental health nurses, that we don't have a voice. I would agree that particularly during the pandemic, I would say that our profession was a little bit invisible. But I think other fields of practice would have said the same, unless you're a critical care nurse. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to portray visually what a mental health nurse looks like. You know, we do wear uniforms in the main now, actually, since COVID, but prior to that, it was very hard to visualise, or for people to be able to see what we were doing. So much of our work is unseen, unspoken about, and certainly that was a feedback that I hear often. In terms of where we are now, in terms of parity of the field of nursing, I would say mental health nursing and LD nursing are in a very strong position. And the reason I say that, which might sound surprising, is, for instance, our role is mandated within the Mental Health Act. We are required to be a separate specialism in a way that other fields of practice just aren't. So if you think about it from that perspective, in terms of safeguarding and parity, we're actually elevated because we actually hold, you know, that has its own issues and problems, but we have a legal role that is recognised in the Mental Health Act, and will continue to be recognised when that Mental Health Act eventually is revised and comes through. So as a field, we are protected, both mental health nurses and learning disability nurses. Having said that, I think also our voice can feel quite small because we can be drowned out just because of sheer numbers. So I always remember, and I remember telling this story to some student mental health nurses the other day around, you know, democratic voting, for instance, and my concerns around ICBs and making sure that all areas are represented. Because I remember going to an event and they were voting on what the safety priorities would be. And of course, as soon as you vote, it looks like it's democratic, but if you've got 12 general health providers and only 2 mental health, you're always outvoted 12-2. So we do have to speak louder, more clearly sometimes, particularly if we feel like we're crowded out. But in terms of some of the things that are coming from mental health nurses, we are far ahead. We are the only field, for instance, to have our own webpage on NHS England, which sets out who we are, what we do. We're the only field of practice to have our own mental health nursing guidance, for instance. So I think there is a levelling up that's already taking place. Certainly in the long-term workforce plan, it specifically highlights the need to invest, retain, reform mental health nursing specifically, rather than the other fields of practice. So I think there's lots in train that actually does give us a voice, much more than perhaps people might think when they're looking more generally. Still a lot to do. Still think there's some issues around perception of what we do and who we are and what we bring. I think there's some issues around the transferability of our skills that isn't always very clear, and recognising as a specialism. So I completely see there is more to do. But I would say actually there's many areas that we are leading, perhaps more than the other fields in terms of being able to showcase that contribution.
There was a kind of...
Sorry?
Sorry.
I was just going to add, I mean, I think that we've got a role as well in terms of the making sure that when we're talking about nursing, we are talking about all of the different fields, that we are talking about mental health, and we are talking about the impact. So when we do anything in terms of looking at showcasing the voice of students or the voice of leaders or other aspects of the kind of standards that we're setting and all of those kind of things, you know, one of the things that I try to make sure that we're doing is that we always have a range of settings, a range of people who are kind of working in different fields. So it's not just, you know, the nursing casualty or whatever that people think of from looking at the TV is what nursing is all about, because I know that it's so much broader than that. So we have to make sure that we're thinking about that and thinking mental health, thinking learning disability as well. And you're right, the numbers, you know, out of that 808,488, nearly 100,000 are in the field of practice of mental health. So it's a significant number, but obviously it's not the majority. So again, amplifying that is really important.
The other thing just to add, globally, there are only 300,000 nurses, mental health nurses in the world who hold a specialist qualification in mental health. So if you think we have a third of that in the UK, so we are a minority. So I would say we are probably punching above our weight globally, more than we might think, because we are minuscule, and obviously we need to have far more than that. And you'll have seen recently the guidance that's come from the International Congress of Nursing and the World Health Organization to really amplify the contribution of mental health nurses and to increase a world stage. So I can only see the numbers increasing. But we are, you know, given we're a tiny number, I would say actually we're doing incredibly well. We just need to have amplify. Yeah.
So on the back of that, there was a kind of another question again, kind of for you both, and then there is a question here, predominantly for Andrea. So on the back of what you just said, there are questions here about, or more kind of worries about nursing becoming a generic profession. I guess it's a question: how do you defend against the pressure to, you know, adopt a generic model similar to like America?
So it goes back to what I said at the beginning. We can't unless they legally change the Mental Health Act, and that's not going to happen for the next at least 20-30 years, given it's taken this long and we haven't got the new revised version through. I think probably the fear is much more around genericism of perhaps education, as opposed to not having a field of practice, because field of practices will remain as they are, and actually other countries are looking to us around our separate and specialist skills. And although America has generic undergraduate or pre-registration training, you have to have a post-registration qualification in mental health to work in mental health. So it's not quite, other countries don't have the generic qualifications in the way that you might think. In other countries such as India, it's post-registration, Australia, it's post-registration. So I wonder if some of the concerns are around the genericism that's perceived around undergraduate training as opposed to the fields of practice not existing.
Yeah.
And certainly related training as well. There seems to be a bias there towards, like prescriber courses, for example. There seems to be a bias there towards general nursing as opposed to kind of mental health nursing.
And I think from our point of view, you're right about the field of practice, and we're sort of that is just so important to kind of hold on to in terms of what you said about the legal position of that. If we go to the undergraduate education that you were talking about, and we've got standards which are holistic in terms of enabling students to kind of see the whole person and learn in the various different ways. And we're expecting, because those standards are outcome based, for the curriculum which are developed by the individual approved education institutions to reflect the field of practice that that students are wanting to work in the future. And I know there's a balance around all of that in terms of making sure that everything gets covered, which is tough. And in Scotland, nursing degrees are 4 years, and so there's we have that question raised with us as well, just more generally. But it is really important that the curriculum addresses what it is that we're expecting, that people have the grounding that they need to be the holistic, person-centred nurse that they need to be, and that they have the field of practice kind of experience, and particularly from the clinical placement point of view, because that is just, that bit of training and education is so important. And one of the things that we're working on at the moment is looking at people's experience of that, and how that is going, and what we might need to do to change that for the future, because as I'm sure colleagues will know, the European Union directive set a certain number of hours that people had to do both in practice and in education. We're not bound by that anymore, so we need to reflect and think, well, can we do it differently? And we've already introduced the flexibility around the use of simulation, in terms of up to 600 hours being used for that. But we're now looking at what can we learn from what's happening in this country already, because lots of universities are doing amazing, interesting things, but also what can we learn from abroad, and how do people train and develop their nursing cohorts with fewer hours? What are the conditions for that? Is that something that we could replicate here, so we could do it differently? That's a really exciting piece of work that we're embarking on now, and I hope that people will get involved.
The other thing, just to add, last week, so was that the 6th of March, the International Congress of Nursing published the first ever global mental health nursing standards for education in the world. They are set up post-registration, although it does set out expectations around all nurses at the point of registration. It also sets out expectations around enhanced and advanced practice in mental health. And I really, really welcome those, because that really sets the bar really around what's expected globally, not just in the UK. And it was really fantastic to see, of course, Pep mentioned, the founder of modern mental health nursing, dare I say, even though that's quite a long time ago. But the importance there around not only physical health, but much more around the therapeutic relationship, for instance, how we maintain and sustain professional boundaries and relationships, the types of interventions that we might be using, and the whole process that we're working towards recovery and what matters around person-centred care. So all the things that we hold dear are really represented within those international standards for the first time. I think a lot of the concerns have been raised around pre-registration nursing is around how the skills are taught to apply within a mental health setting rather than the skills themselves. And I know that's something that needs to be considered by HEIs, and we've been working closely with them and mental health nurse academics, for instance, to think about how much more we can ensure that within that, which is quite a short period of time, that people have an opportunity, but that we also focus on post-registration and continual professional development. And probably shouldn't say this, but I'll say anyway, I think systemically that's been really weak for mental health nursing for many years now, when we think about mental health nursing specific opportunities around ongoing post-registration qualifications and CPD. And that's where I'd really like to see us focusing. And I think those standards help us set a scene that is globally supported and enhanced to really help shape that going forward. So that post-registration for me has got to be critical, where people consolidate skills and really apply them, because mental health is huge. You know, it's not just one bucket. We have subspecialities that just could not in any way be adequately addressed within pre-reg training. So we've got to do much more around that consolidation, enhanced advanced practice piece from my perspective.
So if I could just pick up two aspects of what you just said, Emma, because you are totally spot on as ever. But the two things, first of all, what support are we giving to newly qualified nurses in their preceptorship? And actually, like you say, making sure that that's meaningful, that people get the support, that they get the time to be able to do that. They get the time to be able to consolidate their skills and feel confident in terms of what they're doing and how they're doing it. And we did some work last year about how newly qualified nurses were being supported. And what we know is if they don't get that support, then it might not happen immediately, but they'll leave, because their confidence will be chipped away at, and then something will happen, and God, this is not for me, and I'll use that degree and I'll use it for something else. So preceptorship, absolutely key, and the principles that we've set out, the work that NHS England has done subsequently around that, really important, and needs to be kind of focused on a mental health perspective as well. But then secondly, on advanced practice, so this again is an interesting bit of work that we're going to be involved in. We've been looking over the last year or so at what's happening in advanced practice, whether there is a need for advanced practice to be regulated or not, and if so, what is that going to be looking like? And we will be publishing next week our council papers, which will be going to council on the 27th of March to make recommendations for the future. And so please take a look and see how you can get involved in that too.
The ICN paper that I've been referred to, that's been tweeted out a few times, so you will find it if you look for it on the screen. We'll take a couple more questions and then we'll come to you, Vanessa. So did you guys want to focus on anything else?
There's one particularly about kind of hope going forward. So just kind of mentions the negative media coverage in regard to nursing, and really both from Emma and Andrea. What is the message of hope for the nursing workforce in light of those criticisms?
And I guess just to add on to that as well, it's a lot of our members are asking how do we attract people to the profession when there is such a lot of negativity within media coverage.
Yeah, it's a really important question, because there certainly doesn't seem to be a week that doesn't go by where there is some negative feedback. And some of it is founded. There has been cases where care has not been as it should be, or we haven't provided the care. And there's many reasons for that. And this isn't about apportioning blame to individuals. There's many systemic issues as well. What I would like to see is more balance, because we know that for every bad egg, for want of a better term, there are hundreds and thousands more that are doing a fantastic job in the most difficult of circumstances, day in, day out, with very little thanks. Again, I was talking, people will know that have tuned into me before, about I'm very interested around suicide prevention and how we create conditions in which people thrive. And the thing that always really staggers me about mental health nursing is we get very little external validity. So we don't get the teddies, the thank yous, the bottles of wine, the chocolates, the cards. We do some, but it's very rare.
Not many.
It's not many. And often we're having to provide care when people least want it, or it's against their will. So it's a very different type of nursing. And yet, despite that, we continue. We get up every morning and we do our absolute best, and we continue. And I think all the time that we have nurses that do that, there is always hope, but there is a balance to be had. And I think it's for all of us actually to make sure that we are doing our bit to showcase, to share those positive news stories. There is, I probably can't mention it either, but there is some very exciting things that are coming in terms of the identity and visibility of mental health nursing. But I would also say that it's to each and every one of us to make sure that we are sharing and shouting and bigging up our colleagues, ourselves, the people we work with, the role of mental health nursing, rather than necessarily getting trapped in this cycle at the moment around poor and negative newspaper feedback, media feedback. The other thing that's also really interesting is when I go out and about, particularly to schools at the moment, I went to a local college again a couple of weeks ago, visited a prison actually last week, and people want to be a mental health nurse. So lots of people didn't know it existed. So there is an issue still around the career itself, people knowing that it's a career. There is still something people aren't quite sure. But when they hear about it, people want to do it. So we do really need to think about making it easier. And I don't mean by reducing the bar and the threshold for qualifications, but thinking much more about the other things that enable people to come into practice, such as access to childcare, access to courses close to home, flexibility. Because actually people do want to come into the profession. We just need to think a bit more creatively about how to bring them in and bring them in quickly and support them when they're here, would be my answer. I'll let you go first.
Yeah.
Carry away.
No, it's brilliant. So 2 or 3 things that I'd say. First is we're reflecting health and social care system under pressure. It's under huge pressure in all sorts of different ways. And when something doesn't go well, then people actually remember the folk that they were in front of them, and that's generally going to be a nurse. And so that I think is one of the reasons why we do get that the sort of overwhelming numbers of stories. And as Emma quite rightly says, some of them are stories that we should be listening to. They are kind of problems that have happened that shouldn't have happened, that we need to respond to, and we need to respect the experience that people are bringing to us that needs to improve. But as you quite rightly say, as ever, it's a tiny percentage. It's a tiny percentage of people who are going to be in that situation. But bad news sells newspapers. I mean, that's the problem. So we do all have a responsibility to push relentlessly the positive things that can happen and do happen. And I'd say on that, again, we have a responsibility to sort of be showing those stories through what we're doing as the regulator. But we also, I think, need to talk to the people who are positive about the work that's been done, are positive about the stories and the support that they've had. Families who are, massively grateful for the support that their loved ones have had at times of crisis and in recovery. So there are lots of people who actually would be willing, I think, to help us with the positive stories, and we should try and kind of make those connections as well, because actually, trying to make sure that that people can feel confident about doing that. But one of the reasons why it doesn't happen is because of the stigma of mental health. And people still have that concern that, I don't want to talk about my loved one having a mental health problem and saying that the nurse was amazing and saved their lives or whatever, because actually I don't want to tell the world that my loved one had a mental health problem, because there is a stigma attached with that. So I think I also have a responsibility as somebody bereaved by suicide, and my brother spent a long time in mental health services, talking about some of the positive things that happened, and actually talking about it and being open about it, which is something that I had to spend time talking to my family about, so that they could agree that I could do that. I obviously wouldn't have done it without their support. But actually, I think it's really powerful for us to share those stories, those of us who can, to try and tackle that stigma that's associated with mental health and the concerns that people have, because then we'll be able to get the good news stories more likely to be amplified by others.
Yeah, absolutely. Vanessa, can we come to you? Because I know you've got another set of different types of questions, so let's hear from you. We can't
You're
hear
on
you,
mute.
you're on mute.
And I'm on mute, yeah.
Classic.
Well, yeah, multitasking at home, you see, with kids in the background. So so we've got a lot of questions, but I think you've covered quite a lot, because we've got a lot asking around the genericism of mental health nursing. On that point, we've got a question about what are your thoughts about extending the mental health nursing programme to 4 years so that it covers all the proficiencies during people's nurse education. So we've got that question. We've got a question about what can we learn from nursing overseas, which I know Andrea touched on. Again, we've got a question about how can we get people with more lived experience of accessing mental health services into the mental health workforce. And I think for me, that kind of also reflects the point that we've just been making about people actually in the workforce as well, who've got lived experience, being able to be more open about it and feel supported. So I'll leave it there for now, because it's a lot to digest. But yeah, around the proficiencies, the genericism, nursing overseas, and the lived experience. So
Your first this
Yeah, I'll
time?
let you go
Yeah.
That was a lot, Vanessa, thanks.
I'll recap on them. So yeah.
No,
Go
I
for
mean,
it.
so on the mental health problem, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, you know, it is up to the education institutions that we're approving to determine what the curriculum is like and how long it needs to be done for. And also it will be an issue for the commissioners, which is now sitting from an England perspective with NHS England, now that Health Education England has been merged in. And I remember when we were having this debate about midwifery, and like I'll make the connection in a second, so I'm not going off on one. We were talking about the midwifery programme, the future midwife standards, and a really big debate about, well, you know, how could you do all of that in 3 years? You needed 4 years. And then some people saying, well, actually, you can do it in 3 years, and this is how you do it. This is that. And then the people who were commissioning across the 4 countries of the UK were going, oh my God, if we moved to 4 years, we'd have a year where we have no midwives because they wouldn't be coming out. And also, how much is that going to cost? So there's a lot of things that have got to be taken into consideration. And it's not just a responsibility of us as the regulator. We've got to look at the outcomes that we're getting from the different ways that people can do it. And those academic institutions need to be working with their colleagues within the university and with their clinical placement providers to make sure that the best experience is created for all of the students. And that's the thing, because I can segue beautifully into the bit about what can we learn from overseas, because that's the thing that we can learn from overseas. So one of the things that I get challenged on is that we asked for 2,300 hours because that's what the European Union directive said. But they can do it in 800 hours, Andrea, in Australia. So why can't you not do it in 800 hours? So last year, the chief nursing officer from Australia came to visit. So I asked her, you know, how do you do it? And actually, how they do it is they make every second count. Every second count, and they make every second count because the infrastructure and the support that they put around students in their clinical placements in a way that we could frankly only dream of. So for my money, one of the things that we now need to do as part of this work going forward on the pre-registration education programme standards is to say, what are those conditions that enable Australia, New Zealand, other places to do this in a different way? And could we kind of effectively come up with a shopping list that says these are the things that we would need to have in place so that we could provide students with the support that they need to make every second count? And that, I think, is the link really in terms of that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I would concur with that. I'm not sure we're in a position where we'd want to elongate
No.
length of study. I cannot see that being particularly popular. The questions I get asked all the time at the minute by student nurses and aspirant student nurses is why cannot not be shorter rather than can it be longer? Now, of course, there are some models because we are seeing an increase in dual qualification, which of course is 4 years. But there's no evidence to suggest that nurses after the 4 years have any higher level of skill or competence or effectiveness than those that have done 3 but worked in one branch. So I think there's still some evaluations that need to take place, because whatever we do should be evidence-based.
Yeah.
And as you rightly say, Andrew, we need to make sure the wraparound's there. Because my concern is it's the support that people get around consolidation of learning in practice, rather than necessarily elongating theory and thinking what that might look like. So I cannot see on the horizon, but I could be completely wrong, any movement towards elongating the course. I think it is much more about, as you said, making every second count and actually maximising opportunities in every which way we can to support people to have the skills they need and then the support they need in practice.
I think it's very difficult, isn't it, to when you explain to students that they are going to be working nights and they're going to be travelling to start work at 6:30 in the morning, and then on top of that they're living their lives and trying to earn some money on the side when they can, that you would add on another 9 grand's worth of debt to them. Knowing what nursing pay is like, I think that feels very unrealistic.
Especially if we're trying to encourage more mature people as well into nursing, who've got lives and responsibilities, and placement capacity is really limited, isn't it, in provider organisations, and people are having to travel, to placements. And I would agree with you. I think it's an interesting idea about extending to 4 years, but I think, as you say, there's all the pragmatic issues, isn't there, around achieving that.
Some misunderstanding about what a newly qualified nurse should be able to do. A lot of nurses don't understand how skilled they are, and they don't necessarily understand they've got 10, 15, 20 years of skill that they carry so lightly, and they don't realise. And then when they look at somebody who's finishing their 2 or 3 years, if they're doing a BSc or a master's or even a PG dip, they don't realise what they were like when they were 2 years in. And you can be safe and ready to start your learning as a professional, but not the finished article as a nurse, if anyone ever is finished.
Well,
and I think
any of us at the start of our careers, I mean, goodness, if I go back, there's no way that I could do this job at the age of 22. It's like, maybe I can't do this job now. I mean, who knows? But it's like you grow and you develop, don't you? I mean,
it comes back to some of the things we were saying about nurses articulating their skill base and not realising how skilled they are sometimes. The other thing, I know this is not even my question, but I don't know why I'm asking.
Go on, Nicky.
But it's so cross. I'm going to. The other thing is that with higher education at the moment, they're under such pressure to have generic first years across all sorts of different programmes. And I myself came up through Project 2000 and had that first 18 months. Yeah, absolutely. So young.
Too posh to wash.
Absolutely.
All that stuff makes me so angry. The idea that as a human being you have to choose whether you're going to be intelligent or compassionate. What a load of rubbish. It's never been true. And it's always been garbage, and it's a way of controlling women, particularly women who are nurses. So let's just not even entertain that today. But again, the problem I think with higher education sometimes is, I look at in my own institution, I've got lovely colleagues in adult, but there's 2-3 times as many of them, and they can't help but see things from their perspective the way I see things from my perspective. So when it comes to skill rollout, they genuinely don't know what we do that's so different. They genuinely don't see our specialty. And I wouldn't be a nurse if I couldn't be a mental health nurse. I come from a family of nurses and doctors, and it's essential to me that people understand and take pride in the role of mental health nursing. And I think, somewhere between the standards being laid out and then the way that they get implemented, we're falling down the gap constantly. And we need to be much more clear about how that happens.
I think you're right. And
it's didn't ask me that.
No, it's a great answer.
Nobody
Can you ask all the questions now, Vanessa?
Yeah.
We didn't answer the one about the lived experience, did we? But you're right in some ways that does kind of link back to what I was talking about in terms of us addressing the stigma of mental health, and actually, enabling and supporting people to see that, who was talking to me about this? Somebody was saying, oh yes, earlier today was saying, if you'd had somebody who was who'd had treatment for cancer, and then they thought, actually, I want to be an oncology nurse.
Yes,
People
yeah.
have gone, oh yeah, that's fantastic. That's a great idea. Whereas, why would we have a different response when it's somebody who's had a lived experience of a mental health issue, who then wants to bring their lived experience into that work? And so I think we should be positive about that, and mindful of the fact that people need to be properly supported and able to do that. But it should not be an inhibitor.
No, I'd agree, and I think we need to value all voices with lived experience, because there's some really interesting research. I know you had a previous to MTV, didn't you? Or actually, those who were professional but also had a lived experience found they didn't fit in either camp. They were kind of treated with disdain by people who weren't professionals or qualified. And so I think their stigma goes both ways, actually. Those whose experience is purely lived experience, those who have a registration who also have lived experience, and everyone else who also has lived experience. So, 1 in 3 of us will have experienced a mental health condition. The majority of us will have cared for someone over our lifetime with it. So I do wonder sometimes if we create these arbitrary lines between us, when actually we all bring a lived experience of sorts, and we need to think about how we celebrate and use all of that and enable us to bring our whole selves to work. Because the other issue, of course, is that we know that many nurses will also experience a mental health condition, either as a result of work conditions or personal conditions and trauma in their personal lives. So we need to think much more about how we enable people to bring them whole selves to work, how that is celebrated, but also that they're supported to continue in practice, and have equal access to treatment when they need it. Because again, there is a significant amount of stigma for practicing nurses, as well as other regulated health professionals, to seek treatment when they need it. So there's kind of multiple stigma that we need to tackle actually within this space. And it's quite a complex area that I cannot give justice to this evening, but it's something we need to attend to, I think, much more frequently, actually. I know it's something that's coming up with student nurses as well, but how we support in practice.
I think I was just having a quick look at some of the questions, which are pouring in, by the way. So thank you very much for joining in tonight. And there are some real themes, particularly one that's causing a lot of anxiety, I think, is mental health nurse undergraduate education and real concerns about genericism, which we are addressing. And I think if we need to talk about that again or some more, perhaps we can do that, because it's very important that people feel that they're being heard. So what we can do is go one more round of questions, and then we're going to have to draw to a halt so that people can leave at some point. But let's take the audience again, and thank you so much for collating questions for us. We really appreciate that. So can we come to you again for one more round of questions?
So they're just trying to kind of pull these together. I guess this question is probably asked quite a lot in some ways, and maybe should be. But it's around the value for money of the NMC. And actually,
somebody's revalidated recently.
and actually, the NMC's role in terms of defending nursing, but also how the NMC itself is held accountable. NMC kind of holding registrants accountable for their practice, but actually who holds the NMC, who benchmarks the NMC, if that makes sense. And then there's another question here about how both of you actually keep in touch with frontline workers. So
I think definitely most of these are coming your way.
I can do the frontline bit first. So I still work in clinical practice. So I see myself still as being point of care, at least properly clinically some of the time. But I also make sure that I'm as visible as I can be, going out visiting services, making sure, doing things like this even. Always open to people contacting me on X, also known as Twitter, and try to keep engaged like that. Try to stay connected through networks, because realistically I can't meet with all 38,000 mental health nurses who currently work within the NHS in England. I can try, but I would fail miserably in it. So I do make sure that I connect closely with NHS trusts, with mental health nurse consultants, with Unison, Unite, the RCN, for instance, making sure that I connect with members' bodies so that I can be open to feedback, as well as I mentioned, being in clinical practice. But I would always be really interested in what else people would like to see us doing, what they also think is possible. So we have got the mental health nursing webpage, we've got a mental health nurses futures page now that we never had before, where we're really trying to support people, sharing feedback, connecting. But I would say it's an onward thing, trying to communicate, meet with, be visible, be approachable, be listening, learning, but always open to feedback about how that could be improved and done differently. There is one of me. So it would be an impossible feat to ever say that I represent every single person's view, but I absolutely try my best to represent the majority, or give voice or space to others to come and represent their voices. And so that's the other opportunity that we've had. Because I can be round the table, I also get far more opportunities for other mental health nurses to be round tables. So this year, mental health nurses who are at point of care have met with the health secretaries, various ones that we've had over time, because they can see me as a point of contact to then go out.
Yeah.
So those opportunities have risen for mental health nurses to be influencing not just a national policy, but also internationally through conferencing and World Health Organization, for instance, but also at point of government, but always open to more feedback, how we can improve that.
So, I mean, similarly, getting out and about, talking to people, trying to make myself accessible like you. There's no way on earth that I'm going to be able to contact all of the people on the register, but actually making sure that we are trying to do that as often as possible, and getting into the different settings, getting into mental health settings, social care, as well as other places. So that's, and to be perfectly honest, it's a bit of my job I love. I absolutely love. It's how you get your energy. It's getting out there and talking to people and finding out what they're doing and how they're doing it. I mean, it's just, you know, it really does kind of, you know, G me up, you know, when there's tough days, and there are tough days. So so that's, you know, it is a very positive part of what I do, and also, you know, it doesn't all have to be showy. You know, some of it's just sort of what the chats are that you have, you know, in different places, and again, you know, another great way is I go to parties and people are like, oh gosh, I know your name. It's happened twice to me in the last 2 months. That I've gone somewhere and I've been in a corner with one was a midwife and one was a neonatal nurse for quite some period of time. And believe you me, I got quite a good insight into what was going on. So, you know, there's all sorts of things that you can just make the most of the opportunities that you've got. Which I'll get to the other ones that you were asking. So in terms of value for money, so that one of the things that I would say is that the fee that we charge, which is £120 per annum, has been the same since 2015. So we have not put it up in reflection of inflation or the demands that we've had or any of those sorts of things. And if we had done, we'd be closer to about 160. So, you know, there's been a real focus. And when I came into the organisation, we wrote our very first financial strategy. And what I said in that is that, you know, at some stage we're going to have to put it up at scheme because like we can only keep on going for so long. But that we would do everything that we possibly could not to do, and try to be efficient, reduce costs in other ways, rather than going for increasing the fee. So we've tried to do that, and we have done that quite successfully over a period of time. But in terms of, you know, what is our role? Our role fundamentally in law is to protect the public. I mean, that is the fundamental thing that we're here for. But we protect the public by promoting confidence in the profession and setting those high standards and supporting those high standards. So again, when I first came in, we kind of created our new strategy, and we're very clear, we are here to regulate. we've got to set those standards, we've got to quality assure education programmes, maintain the integrity of the register, and address fitness to practice issues if they're raised with us. And that's the cornerstone of what we've got to do, and we've got to do that well. There's bits of that, particularly of fitness to practice, that we are, to be honest, struggling with at the moment. The impact of the pandemic was significant in terms of our ability to do that work, particularly in the first year, and that has left us with a significant caseload and some timeliness issues. And I am acutely conscious of the impact that that has on people, particularly professionals under scrutiny, but also the people who've made those referrals, members of the public who've got to relive their most difficult moments when they're working with us. So that's our kind of major focus. We've got to do that, but we do want to do it in a supportive way. So over the last few years, we've done a variety of different things, both to support the public in terms of their connection with us, but also supporting professionals, particularly professionals who may well be going through fitness to practice. So introduce the care line, which we've now established as a permanent feature, so that there is an emotional helpline 24/7 available for people who are going through a fitness to practice process, because they've got people who've got case officers and all of those sort of folk, but actually you maybe don't want to have that conversation with somebody from the NMC, but we've created that opportunity. So we do want to do that in a supportive way. But the final bit in terms of trying to demonstrate our value for money is to use our influence. So we're not a trade union, when we don't have members, we have professionals on our register. We can't be a campaigning body. We have to maintain that political neutrality, which is important for a professional regulator to have. But we do sit on a gold mine of evidence. We've got all sorts of insight into, who's on the register, when they leave the register, why they leave the register, what are the issues that are coming through in terms of fitness to practice, what can we feed back to employers, what can we feed back to the professionals on the register about the things that can trip you up and what you might need to do. So there's a whole host of things that I think that we can do, both to directly provide information to employers, to registrants, but also to feed into some of the conversations that we had about the long-term workforce plan. And the things that I've been saying, for example, around retention. Wonderful attracting people in, but we've got to retain them. Continuing professional development is absolutely key in that. So using our voice from an evidence base to try and sort of make a difference, and also speaking up for an inclusive way of people being supported. About a third of our register comes from what we might properly call the global majority, and we know that those colleagues face levels of discrimination and racism which are completely unacceptable, but they are a patient safety risk if that is what's happening. If you've been the subject of microaggressions, which aren't micro, they're aggressions, and then you're faced with a difficult situation, particularly in the mental health field. Are you going to go to the person who's just been laughing at you to ask for help? Well, you're not. You could, that undermines your ability to do your job properly. So us kind of working again with NHS England and NHS Confederation, developing the anti-racist resource, not last year but the year before. Again, really important in terms of trying to tackle some of those issues and problems that do affect the professionals on our register, but doing that in a kind of, as I say, evidence-based way. And the final question was, who holds us to account? Believe you me, I feel blooming accountable. So it happens in a variety of ways. We have our council who are appointed by the Privy Council, and 6 lay members, 6 registrant members, and they scrutinise what we do, hold me to account for delivering on the strategy. We hold those meetings in public. Dave comes along on a regular basis and tweets out to the world. So I have to be really careful what I say. But and we answer questions in that forum, both from the council, but also from people who come along to the meeting as well. We formally have an oversight body, which is called the Professional Standards Authority. They set standards of good regulation, and they review us every year on those standards of good regulation. And once every 3 years, that review is what they call a periodic review, which is a deeper dive into what we're doing and how we're doing it. We're actually going through one of those at the moment. We are accountable to Parliament as well. So actually the Health and Social Care Select Committee could invite me and the chair to go along and account for what we're doing and how we're doing it. And like any public organisation, the public and the media, subject us to a level of scrutiny as well. And that has been happening to us at the NMC recently, with whistleblowing allegations being raised with the Independent and reported, and a variety of different things coming through there. And we have taken it upon ourselves to say, these are really serious and important issues that we need to address. And we've invited in a King's Council wonderful woman called Ijoma Omabala, who is looking at some of the regulatory issues that have been raised, how we've dealt with the whistleblowing. And we've also invited in Nazir Afzal, who did the culture review into the London Fire Brigade, to look at our culture and look at the issues that have been raised there as well. Again, those reports will be made public. Certainly the regulatory cases one and the culture one will be fully public. The whistleblowing one will have a little bit of wrap around it because of obviously the confidentiality issues there. But we are committed to being open about that, learning from it, and not just learning to say, oh yeah, we've learned lessons. It's about learning to change, to make the difference that we need to make internally. So, as I say, I feel pretty accountable.
Is there one more from you guys, or have we covered most of the information?
I can ask.
I bet you can. Go on.
In both the roles, is there anything that keeps you awake at night? It's a really big role. It must be incredibly stressful. So what things worry you most?
If I give you the list, you will wonder how on earth I actually sleep. And being a menopausal woman, not much. But yeah, it's a big job. It's a 24 hours, 7 days a week job. There's something happening all the time. I worry about our fitness to practice caseload. I worry about the work that we're currently doing as a consequence of the fraud in the computer-based test centre in Nigeria that we discovered last year, the impact on people of all of that. I worry about my colleagues because they're doing tough jobs themselves, and they're making difficult judgments. Every day we make a difficult judgment, and somebody will not be happy with some of those difficult judgments. So we are judged as well, and that is can be very difficult for some junior colleagues. So yeah, I worry about a lot actually.
It's probably similar. I try not to think about it sometimes. So I suppose the biggest thing that's worried me significantly is probably workforce. Just really worry about the mental health and well-being of our nursing workforce, and how that then impacts on the care that we're able to provide, because the reality is we cannot provide the care that we want to if we are not ourselves mentally, physically well, actually. And so I do worry that the level of stress that people are under, and scrutiny, because that scrutiny actually goes right through. I hear that from mental health nurses all the time, that we do feel as a profession we are under much more extreme levels of scrutiny than perhaps our physical health colleagues are around the judgments we do or don't make every single day, and I feel that in practice. So I think it's all of those things. It's the care that we want to provide that we can't because we know people are waiting and there just aren't enough of us. And then there's the normal stuff, kids, have I done the washing? Have I gone to work with a washing tab stuck to my elbow like I did to the prison visit the other day? The normal stuff that keeps you awake. But the way you have to manage it is you just have to wake up every day and think you're going to make a difference this day and just work collectively together. But we wouldn't be human if we didn't worry. And if you don't worry, I always think it means you don't care. and we
I
definitely
think
care.
that's really powerful, you sharing that. I think it really reflects what a lot of us feel in our professions as well at all different levels.
Yeah. And I think you're right, it is about caring. I mean, actually, why do this job if you didn't care about the difference that you could make? And it's the difference that you can make for, all of those people on the register, and those people on the register touch the lives of every UK citizen at some point in their lives. That's the prize of getting it right, is kind of having that positive impact. But it is also the thing that kind of impacts on you in terms of, are we getting it right, and can we make it even better than we're doing at the moment? And one of the things that I say to new colleagues as they arrive, and I will be doing one of these sessions in the morning, is it's all about the people. It is all about the people. And I love it when I've got somebody in the room who's in procurement or something, that they could do for any organisation, but they're doing it for the Nursing and Midwifery Council. And that is helping their colleagues to do the job that helps, all of you to do your jobs. And that's what's, impacting on the people that are looking after my dad. I mean, it's you've got to make those connections. But the other side of it also comes to, in terms of worrying about whether you're doing it right or not.
And just so we haven't left you out, because obviously being online, it's very difficult for you to join in a little bit. Is there anything that you want to bring up, or any questions that are still not been asked?
No, we had a question that came in about racism, but I think Andrea covered that really well. I was thinking of asking a little bit about kind of what more we can do to support just and restorative approaches, but I think you've covered some of that when you were talking about the fitness to practice here, and so maybe that's something we need to come back to as well, Nicky, as a discussion, because I think we haven't really got time.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, could I ask you both just to obviously not sum up, because that's a lot, but just if there's anything that you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to say, or any sort of thoughts you wanted to leave the audience with today? We're finishing up now.
I suppose I'd like to, I haven't really had time to think about all those hard questions in terms of summary. I think what really resonated was that word hope, because fundamentally mental health nurses is about hope, isn't it? Because we come alongside people when they have none, whether it's themselves, their families, their communities. And that always stays with me, actually, in thinking about how do we carry that hopefulness for ourselves. I do feel absolutely hopeful for our profession. Yes, there is lots that we need to do. There's lots that we could do differently. Yes, we need lots more of us. But actually, we have such a privilege and an honour in what we can do, what we do. And so for me, it's carrying that hope, and for each and every one of us to really think, what is it that we bring each day, and focus on that positive and share it and shout about it, and be bold, be brave, but shout about it, is what I'd say.
And I think that I'd go into a very similar place, which is to say, it's been a real pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity and the great questions. But it sort of emphasises for me what a privilege this job is, in terms of being able to run an organisation that supports the amazing work that you and your colleagues do. And I know from my own family experience how important that work is, and the difference that it makes. And please don't ever forget that people perhaps don't know how to say thank you to a mental health nurse. I don't think I ever probably did to any of Adrian's nurses at the time, but I should have done. But you're probably not in that zone. But I think that you do make a difference. You make a huge difference, and it is a real pleasure and a privilege to be able to, as a non-nurse, work with you to try and make that difference for all of our communities.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Thank you very much to our fantastic audience who collated questions, and online as well. Thank you. And for being so honest and open. I think that's been really helpful for people to hear those answers to them. So thank you very much. And good night, everybody.
Nicky, just
Nice.
before we finish, can I have a final thought?
No, gosh,
Ooh.
I've forgotten about you.
Oh.
For people who can't see, it's Dave coming. Don't be
Dave is
frightened.
coming from out behind the camera.
Hello. We do always like to leave MHTV episodes with a positive, and I think we've done that really nicely tonight. But I want to do an extra positive, and I want to talk about the Cavell Star Awards. So it's an award that is given to it's an inspiring national awards programme given to nurses, midwives, nursing associates and healthcare assistants who shine bright and show exceptional care to one of three groups of people, either their colleagues, their patients or patients' families. And I applied for one of these awards probably about a year or so ago because I know two really inspirational mental health nurses who desperately deserve this award. And this has been sat on my desk at home for so long because I've been waiting for an opportunity when those two nurses would be in the same room with me and I could kind of present it properly. Sadly, Vanessa isn't here today, but I still wanted to do it tonight. So she's going to get her part of this tomorrow. I'm going to bring my axe grinder, is that axe grind, whatever the word is, to cut it up. But just to say that I think that Nicky and Vanessa have been absolutely amazing staff.
Thank you.
Done that to you, Nicky.
Thank you.
So you can have half of that. And obviously it's a surprise to Emma and Andrew as well, but I'm sure they want to share in the congratulations of the award. So I'm just going to go back round to the side now to press the button.
I did wonder what he was doing,
Yeah.
as I often do.
Yeah, but I was about to say, that's the normal.
But being a mental health nurse, I just went with it. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
That is wonderful.
Lovely.
Thank you.